Hi, my name's Anna. Welcome to my video explaining a really important element of criminal law, mens rea. Now, to understand this, you need to understand that for most crimes, in order to be found guilty, two things must happen at the same time. That's what we mean by coincidence. They've got to happen coinciding with each other. We need the actus reus and the mens rea. Now, those are Latin terms, and quite simply, actus reus means guilty act, and mens rea means guilty mind. So for a person to be found guilty of most crimes, you must do a guilty act while at the same time having a guilty mindset. Now, they have to be together for a reason. You may have had thoughts in the past that, oh, I'd love to kill someone, but you don't actually act on it, so it's not a crime. It might also be that you do something illegal, but it was a total and complete accident that's not your fault. You did a guilty act, but you didn't have a guilty mind at the same time. So for most crimes, you have to have the two together to be prosecuted. Now, there is a slight exception, and those are called strict liability offences. Those are offences where only the actus reus is needed for you to be charged. The law doesn't care whether you actually meant it at the time or not. A really easy example to remember is selling a lottery ticket to someone who's underage. The law doesn't care whether you really tried to check their ID or whether you didn't care at all. If you sell a lottery ticket to someone who's underage, you are guilty. You've done the guilty act. We don't actually care if you had the guilty mind or not. But for most crimes, you need to have both together. There are also different levels of mens rea that you need to be aware of. And the type of crime that you're looking at will determine what the prosecution has to prove in terms of what a person wanted. The two categories of crime are specific intent crime and basic intent crimes. Now, note that this is different to motive. The law isn't really concerned with why you wanted to do something. The law is just asking the question, did you want that illegal consequence or not? Specific intent crimes tend to be the more serious one. That's quite easy to remember. Serious and specific go hand in hand. In order to be found guilty of this crime, the prosecution has to prove that the defendant intended or wanted a specific outcome from their actions. Now, murder is probably the easiest specific intent crime to understand. In order to be found guilty of murder, a person must be shown to have intended to kill, or at the very least, they intended to cause serious harm, which a person later died from. Now, we don't care why you wanted them dead, and we also don't care if it was premeditated and planned ages in advance, or it was a snap decision that you made there and then to kill. The simple question that the prosecution must prove is that you wanted to kill or cause serious harm. Now, if you've killed but you didn't intend that, it can't be murder, although it can be a lower offence such as manslaughter. Other crimes which aren't as serious will accept a basic level of intent. That basic level is called recklessness. Now, here you can have either intent or recklessness. Basically, you can have either, but if it's a specific intent crime, you must specifically show intent. So a good example of a basic intent crime is the crime of battery. Now, the actus reus, or guilty act of a battery, is applying unlawful force onto somebody else. And at the same time, we must show either the defendant intended to apply that force, so you intended to punch somebody on the nose, for example, or you were reckless in that happening. Either is acceptable to be found guilty of battery. So basic intent offences can have either level. Specific intent, only intent will do. So what do we mean by these levels? What do we mean by these words? Intent is the most serious level that you can have in criminal law. And intent is where you wanted the consequence to occur. So if it's murder, for example, you did something such as shooting someone, wanting them to die as a result. Now, intent can come in two forms. You either have direct intent or oblique intent. Direct intent is quite straightforward. It's where the consequence was the main aim that you wanted. You want someone dead, you shoot them, they die. Simple, that's direct intent. What's a little bit more complicated is something called oblique intent. Now, if something's oblique, it's not kind of quite see-through, so you can't quite see it straight away. Now, this is where the consequence you're being charged with was not the defendant's main aim. They wanted something else. However, the jury believes that that person also foresaw this particular consequence as a virtually certain consequence. Now, if you carry on with your plan, the law says you intended that too. Let me give you an example. So it may be that I own an aeroplane and I decide I want to blow it up and claim insurance for it. Now, my main aim, my direct intent, is insurance fraud. So the main crime I directly intend, is fraud. I put a bomb on the plane and I set it off so it will go off when the plane is over the ocean. And I'm very good at planning, so it would. Now, this will clearly kill the pilot and the rest of the crew on board. So, would I be guilty of murder? Have I intended to kill the crew and the pilot? Well, I would argue it wasn't my direct intent because my main aim is insurance fraud. What the jury will then have to consider is, when I was planning insurance fraud, did I foresee those deaths as a virtually certain consequence of my fraud? And I would think so. So therefore, I have direct intent for fraud and also oblique intent for murder. So I would be guilty of both crimes. There have been some really, really key cases which have considered these. The first key case was R versus Maloney. In this case, a stepfather and stepson decided to have a shooting competition while drunk. They decided to see who could put together a gun the fastest. Now, the stepson put together his gun and shot the stepfather. He was charged with the stepfather's murder. Now, we have the act that's involved, the unlawful killing of another person under the Queen's Peace. The question is whether we have the mens rea for murder. Did the stepson intend to kill or cause serious harm? Now, killing was not his main aim because his main aim was to show off in the shooting competition. Did he have oblique intent? Did he foresee killing his stepfather as a virtually certain consequence of his actions? No, he didn't. Therefore, he wasn't guilty of murder, although he was guilty of a lower charge of manslaughter. We also see this in the case of R versus Woolen. In R versus Woolen, a man was left alone with his young baby to look after. The baby was screaming and screaming, so he decided to throw the baby in a fit of rage into its cot. However, his aim was off. The baby hit the wall next to the cot and fell in, died. The question was the father guilty of murdering the baby? We have the actus reus, the unlawful killing of a baby, but do we have mens rea, the intent to kill or cause serious harm? Now, he did not have direct intent because his main aim was to put the baby in the cot. However, he can still be guilty of murder if he has oblique intent. Did the man foresee the death of a baby as a virtually certain consequence? Now, the judge described him as a man of sub-intelligence, and he genuinely did not foresee that this could kill the baby. Now, you and I might see that, but he didn't, and that's key. So it's not enough that a normal, ordinary, reasonable person would foresee that consequence. The question is, did they? He didn't, so he was not guilty of murder, though he was guilty of a lesser charge of manslaughter. The final main case on this is a case called R versus Matthews and Elaine. These were two robbers who robbed a man and then threw him into a large, fast-flowing river so they could run away. When they threw him in, he started shouting, "Help, help, I can't swim." But they left him anyway, and he drowned. They were charged with murder. They've clearly got the actus reus. They've caused the unlawful killing of their victim. But do they have the mens rea, the intent to kill or cause serious harm? Now, they argued that they didn't because their direct intent, their main aim, was robbery and the subsequent getaway. However, the jury believed those men foresaw the drowning as a virtually certain consequence of throwing him into a fast river with no help. So they were still found guilty of murder as well as robbery. So, just to recap those three key cases you need to be aware of. R versus Maloney with the stepfather shooting. R versus Woolen with the baby being thrown. And R versus Matthews and Elaine with the robbers in the river. Three easy cases to hopefully demonstrate how oblique intent works. Now, if it's a basic intent crime, we either have direct intent or recklessness. Recklessness works in a similar way to oblique intent, but we don't have to be as sure. And I like this because we've got lots of alliteration. Recklessness is where you realise the risk. Love how that sounds. The defendant realised the risk that they could be committing a crime, and they go ahead and do it anyway. I like to think of it as, so what? Now, this was looked at in the case of R versus Cunningham. In R versus Cunningham, the defendant broke into the basement of a house and ripped the gas meter off the wall. In those days, it used to have a coin meter that you would put coins in. So he was trying to steal the money. This broke the gas pipe, which made the woman who lived in the house next door very, very ill. And he was essentially charged with poisoning her, although she didn't die. She was just sick. So the prosecution were able to show that he'd caused the poisoning very easy, the actus reus. But the question is, did he have the mens rea for poisoning her? Now, it's a basic intent offence. So the prosecution either has to prove that he was intending the poisoning or he was reckless about poisoning her. Now, it wasn't his main aim to poison. His main aim was to steal the money. So the court then looked at recklessness. Did he realise the risk of poisoning and pull it off the wall anyway? And the jury thought not. They didn't think there was enough evidence that this risk had crossed his mind. So they work in a very, very similar way, so don't get them mixed up. But this is where you just realise a risk could happen and think, I'm going to do it anyway. Oblique intent, for specific intent crimes, you had to see it as virtually certain to happen. Think what high percentage that would be like. Finally, the lowest level is something that we see in gross negligence manslaughter. And this is where you were negligent in your actions. You did an action, and although you didn't mean to, you fell grossly below the expected standard. So, key cases so far. In recklessness, we had R versus Cunningham. Oh, gonna run out of space. In negligence, we have a case called R versus Adomako. Now, Adomako was a doctor. He was an anaesthetist in surgery. And while he was being part of a surgical procedure, the patient died. The patient died because Dr. Adomako failed to realise that the patient's breathing tube had come loose. Now, this clearly isn't murder. Although we've caused the unlawful killing of a human being, the doctor did not intend to kill directly, or even foresee it as a virtual certain risk. He'd been careless. However, the reason he was charged with a crime was because he was grossly careless. This wasn't just a little mistake. This was grossly falling below what he should have done. In evidence, it was shown that a typical doctor would take about 15 seconds to notice a breathing tube has come loose. Dr. Adomako took 9 minutes to realise this. That's not just a mistake. That's not even just a bit negligent, that was grossly negligent. So for gross negligence manslaughter, the mens rea is not meaning it, is not intending it, but simply falling so badly below the expected standard that you deserve to be treated criminally. That's the explanation and the basics of mens rea. You have 5 really key cases for you to learn there, and I suggest you look those up further for more details of the legal principles. And I hope you understand these as we continue to go through principles of mens rea. Thank you for watching.